You will find that if you look for the light, you will often find it. But if you look for the dark, that is all you will ever find. Let's talk about season 2 of Legend of Korra. Hey guys, welcome back to the series of Before You Watch, where I do a non-spoiler review. Today, we're going to be talking about Book 1, Spirits of Legend of Korra. This is a non-spoiler review. This is mostly for those people who are coming in from the Netflix wave, who are now watching it for the first time. So keep that in mind in the comments below. We're doing this non-spoiler, but don't worry, we're going to be doing a discussion of the entire series in a live stream later on after I get done with all these books. But this one is a little bit complicated. I feel like, I'm still going to do my structure of what I like, what I didn't like, in my recommendation, but there might be some overlap because this is a very complicated series. If you don't know, the popular opinion among Avatar fans is that this is the worst season. Now, when I say that, at least for me, when I say the worst season, I'm saying that as it's not bad. Like, let's say like this is the great scale, this is the good scale, this is the okay scale. It's right in this area. It's not bad for me, but it is for me my least favorite season, even after my rewatch, even after liking it even more than I did the first time I initially watched it. I still like it, but I do still believe that it's not the strongest of all the seasons. And it's a complicated conversation because it's the arguments I will put against it aren't necessarily the ones that you might have heard about. Like, I don't really, this is hard to talk about. I'm going to keep this in so you guys can know how much I'm struggling on how to like discuss this, but let me just like get into it and start talking about it. So the things that I liked about the show, as I was trying to get into when I was talking about it before, the thing that most people will have problems with is the lore and the world building and what they think considers is an overwrite of the previous series, when really to me it is something, the stuff that is brought up in this season isn't an overwrite, it's just a further explanation, and it lives in parallel to the previous series and how it was explained. Even, again, this is non-spoiler, so I can't talk about it specifically, but there's a specific thing that people get issues with in terms of the bending art. And in the episode itself, it shows that it's not overriding it because there specifically is a training sequence with a certain character. Not a certain character, but a certain creature that trains a certain character. And it's like, how do you not see that this is living in parallel with what was told before, not overriding it? But anyway, for me, I actually absolutely love the world building and the lore that happened in this series. I liked it a lot. Probably the biggest element of this season is actually, its lore and the magic system and how that all works out, versus maybe in other series that it's mostly just about human conflict. This one's definitely, granted, if you're going to call your season Spirits, you're going to be talking about spirits, and that's going to get into some, pretty magical, mystical type of stuff. Also, what I liked about this one is humor. I actually forgot that we're not introduced to Varric and Julie until this season. I actually thought, hey, where were they in season 1? Why aren't they showing up? I thought they were in Republic City, but completely forgot that they're not introduced until this point, and they are some of the funniest characters. Also, there's a lot of good funny moments just in general in this entire series. I liked a lot of what happened with some character reveals. There's a big reveal about Aang and how he treated his children and how he was a parent to them. And again, this is another issue that some people kind of level against this book, and I take it as a positive because it shows Aang in more human light. And always, I think Avatar does this really well in showing that no one person is without flaws. And I think that, and also not the fact that people have flaws just for the sake of flaws, but that they're motivated flaws, that they're something that makes sense. And for me, the fact that Aang would have prioritized one child who was going to be the last airbender versus his other children totally makes sense, and it pans out. Now, this isn't a huge spoiler, it's just something that comes up actually very early on in the season, but that notion does come up, and I think it's done well. I think it expands the character of Aang and makes him more of a human being. And also, Aang is not a perfect person anyway. If you look at him in the first series, in book 1, he was doing some pretty shady, shicey stuff, but he was doing it from not to be malicious, but because of his own fear of what could come of that. So I personally like that. I love the humor, I love the lore, love what was done with the expansion of the backstory for some of our characters. And of course, the fights and the music are top tier. My single favorite shot of the entire franchise, I'm talking about the entire franchise, my favorite just single shot shows up in the first episode of this series. And I think someone in my comments later was, when I was talking about, hey, what do you guys think about book 2, said that they thought the animation took a dive, and I didn't see that. I think the animation is still very fluid, very, very good. And again, some of my favorite fight scenes and some of my favorite animations are in this series, so I don't share that same gripe against the show for book 2. And the music, of course, is stellar. There's even a scene where they're actually, one of the characters is playing an instrument, like at first you think, oh, okay, this is just score that's happening, but then you like reveal that someone's actually playing it, and actually it comes up again, you know, later in the series, which is kind of cool because it makes that person sort of seem like a bard, which is kind of cool, especially for the certain character, because like there's reasons for it. But I liked it a lot. I think I liked that element quite a bit. And then what I liked a lot about the ending of this series and what happens in the series is that there's a grave consequence that comes in the last few episodes, and it sticks. Usually, like we had in book 1, where we had Korra losing her bending and then getting it back, it's like, okay, that's fine. I mean, sure, like your avatar, you need to keep having your powers. But in this particular story, there is something huge that happens that actually sticks, and I love that. That takes a lot of courage as a storyteller to be able to do that, especially with how coveted this thing is in the world itself. And while some people take issue with it, I personally think it's amazing because it actually sets up real dire consequences in the world, and they actually let it stay that way. They could have easily at the end just like flipped it and been like, oh well, nope, back to normal, but they don't. And I love that about that. And then what I also love about it is that we actually learn something from the villain in the end. And those are my favorite kinds of stories, that when a hero and villain are pitted together and the hero changes because of what the villain does, that's always going to be compelling for me as a viewer of stories and participant in people's works. If you have that sort of a storyline, I'm always going to be on board for that. Okay, so things I didn't like. It seems like the writers kind of forgot the character arcs that some of our characters took at the beginning of the series. There's some early stuff with Korra that I felt like was problematic for me. They kind of mischaracterized her as just being a headstrong, like I just want to fight just for the sake of it, or I just want to be an adventurer for the sake of it. When really, when we saw from book 1, she's not just that on the exterior. She does that for a reason. She did that because she actually wants to protect others, and because she feels like that is her responsibility as an avatar, not because she just wants to go out and be like, I'm gonna beat people's faces. Like that only happens for like maybe the first 2 episodes of the season, and that goes away, so I'm okay with that. But then there's some other characters that show up that also have issues. In particular, the thing that hit me the most, although I can say that there's issues with Mako, there's issues with Asami a little bit, there's issues with Lin Beifong, but the most terrible for me was Bo Lin. Bo Lin is my boy. Bo Lin is my homie. They did him dirty at the end of this series. Now, granted, of course, he switches up and all that kind of stuff, but the fact that they did what they did to him, and they had him acting in a way, especially when it's in relation to his brother, he should have done some different things, is what all I'm saying. I think Bo Lin should have did some different things, or he should have been more willing to listen to Mako in the context of what's going on in the scene more than what is presented in the show itself. Like they make the turn for him happen way too late and way too deep into the season, and it hurt me, like watching those scenes. Watching one particular scene that happens in a prison really hurts me. Like I'm like, well, this is why is he acting like this? Like I get it, there is some motivation to it, but because of what we know from Bo Lin, especially what we know from him from book 1, I don't think he would have continued with this mentality that he was kind of developing throughout the season for this long, or he wouldn't have been that far gone. And yeah, Bo Lin, he was done dirty. I didn't like it at all. And the same thing I said from the book 1, I feel like this should have been a little bit deeper, just to get a little bit more motivations, especially from our antagonist character from this season. I feel like if we got more insight into what we do get little bits of it. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. There's no, at least an attempt to make an explanation for this person. But even this person and their followers, it's like, why would they still be following this person when they're clearly evil? And also, I feel like this is kind of a weaker plot because it is definitely more about like, the good and evil, and I usually like more of like the gray area, human heart type situation, kind of a thing. But at the same time, I don't think it's terrible what happens with the good and evil plot that kind of happens in this. And it's not really good and evil when you really start thinking about it and look into it. And that's a big thing too, is that I think the way you go into the show, it really is going to affect what you take out of it. Because if you do look at it from all angles, I think there is a lot to pull from it, versus if you just kind of look at it surface level and look at the surface explanation, then you're not going to get as much from it, and you may not like what happens with the, you know, the good and evil plot that kind of pops up. Because it's not really good and evil if you look at some, again, I wish this is a spoiler review so I can really talk about it, but there is, of course, these two spirits that we, you know, are introduced to. One of them is like the spirit of chaos, and then one is the spirit of peace. And I wish, and this is what I said about earlier about it being deeper, I wish those ideas and what it means to present those two things and what the pro and cons of each of those are was more deeply delved into, because I think, at least for some of the fans who really look into it and kind of do a little bit of headcanon to kind of make it work, there is a lot of draw that you can get from that story, but it isn't presented and executed in the best way. But it is there, and that's what I said, I think, in my first review, is that there's a really good foundation for Korra most of the time that doesn't always show itself very well. And I also think that it's very clear that book 1 and book 2, the creators felt that those were only going to be their only chance at having seasons, like new seasons of Legend of Korra. So you can kind of feel at the end of the series that it wraps up quickly and then has a quick prologue to, you know, keep an open thread for a potential new season. And I feel like the first half of the series distinctly feels like its own thing, versus book 3 and 4, which we're going to get into later, I feel like are more cohesive, because they knew that they were going to have multiple stories going on. And I could feel that. I think the audience would feel that too, but I could definitely feel the production weighing on it and kind of the behind the scenes stuff that's going on. And I think that's a detraction from book 2 and book 1 to an extent, is that they don't feel like continued stories when they do live in this, you know, greater tapestry, but don't really fit into it. They're kind of like their own individual weirdness, and they don't actually progress further, but they do in a little way. Like there's a little thread, and that thread feels very rushed. So yeah, that's something I didn't really jive with all that well. And while I do agree that I don't like the love triangle stuff in this, the way people kind of make it out and blow it out of proportion and just like, it's the worst thing ever, if they took that out it'd be great, I don't think it's that bad. I don't like it. It's definitely in my category of I don't like, but it's not terrible. It's not abysmal. It's not like Twilight levels of grossness. And that's the thing. When people say, like, make these proclamations of like abysmal, terrible, horrendous, you're kind of, when you're saying that, you're kind of putting it on the level of some of these terrible, and maybe you like Twilight, but for me, Twilight is pretty terrible. That's a good measurement of what is a terrible love triangle, a terrible romance story. It's not to that level at all. Korra is not even anywhere near that level, but it's something I didn't like as well. I think that it is kind of tacked on to some of the, although I do understand some of the fighting stuff between Mako and Korra and how that stuff kind of panned out. I think it was well motivated. Like when watching it, I was waiting for, okay, when's the moment where I'm gonna be like, this is not working for me. This is terrible. Like, why are they fighting? I actually do want to make a video like separately about like why Mako and Korra don't work, or what reason is it that they don't work, because I don't feel like they gave the relationship enough of a shot. And I kind of, again, like I said before, I wish it was deepened. I wish we got to see more of it. I wish that we actually got the questions presented, and because it mostly was just like, cut off, next plot, cut off, all right, next plot, versus it really, you know, diving in and like understanding like what is this, like why it's not a simple answer. Like, why can't they just let themselves, I don't know, go through it? But that's just me. While I do like what the villain presented in this book and what it means going forward for the world, like not just for Korra herself and how she's about to change, but the world itself, I still think this is the weakest villain of the entire franchise. And I'm not talking about just Korra, because I actually think that Korra has some of the best antagonist characters above even Ozai from the original series. But I even put this character below Ozai, and I don't think Ozai is that interesting of a villain either. And I think the thing that hurts about that particular thing most is that this character could have been amazing. Like, this character could have been one of the best, and could have presented these moral conundrums Which is funny because I think that what's presented in this book actually is expanded upon and done much better in the next two books of book 3 and 4, because both book 3 and 4 are both answers to what happens in book 2, but two different, avenues of how to hit that. And I think, granted, okay, so if book 2 never happened, then we won't get the amazingness that is book 3 and, the book 4 stuff. But even so, like, I think that some of that thematic presentation could have been in book 2 and still could have expanded to book 3 and 4 and still been great. But unfortunately, it's not. We have this weird kind of first half of the series that feels different from the second half of the series. So would I recommend this? Yeah, I think I would recommend this book. I do think that it is the weakest part. I'll say that right now. I do think it's the weakest part of the entire franchise. I think it's the weakest part of the Korra series. But I do think that it sets up a lot of very important stuff that you can get through. I don't think that it's as bad as people make it out to be, and the most that they say is like the lore sucks and that it ruins the Last Airbender. It doesn't. It runs in parallel and just explains more of the lore. The love triangle, people say the love triangle was terrible, and I was expecting to see this Twilight level romance or something like that. And because I don't remember that in my first watching of the romance being that bad, and then in rewatching it, I'm like, I still don't understand why people think it's bad. It's not. It's like. It sure doesn't really add too much. It doesn't really fit into the plot, or doesn't really the themes of the book don't really play into that. It definitely feels tacked on, but it's not terrible. The fight scenes and the music are astounding. Some of my favorite fights in the entire series are in this one. Like I said, my favorite shot of the entire series is in this one. So yeah, I would recommend it. Definitely go in knowing that it's not going to be the best of Avatar. It's not going to be the best that it's going to deliver to you, but it's also not anywhere near the worst in terms of the overall tapestry of media and animated television. So yeah, I recommend it for sure. But again, I would like to hear from you guys in the comment what you guys feel about book 2, especially for you guys who have done your rewatches, whether this is your 3rd, 4th, 5th rewatch, or maybe it's your 2nd rewatch like me. What did you think of it, on your 2nd rewatch? And if you're new to the franchise and you just recently watched it for the first time, and then also, especially if you've heard of all this stuff about book 2 being the worst, do you feel that it deserves that put onto it? Do you think it is an abysmal show? Let's hear in the comments. But I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace, love, and remember, be water, my friends.